Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the GAI Insights news briefing. I am here with a bunch of our wonderful analysts, and we will do for you what we do as always, which is go through the recent news and tell you if you need to tune into it or not and why. Today, we will be talking about POE. We haven't talked about that offering from Quora for a while. They've got some updates similar to what Anthropic has done. Talk about some new materials to help make chips, particularly the wiring on the chips. A couple of pieces from the Wall Street Journal that we'll talk about on climate and small models and a few others. So let us dive right in. Go ahead, Ankaj.
Thanks, David. So the first one that we have for today comes from the French AI lab Q.AI, and they have released what they are calling as OpenAI GPT-4o killer Moshi. So it's based on Helium 7 billion parameter model, and it integrates text and audio training.
All right. Adam, what do you think about this?
I think it's not as cool as it sounds. I've played with it a little bit, and I've been pretty unimpressed, honestly. One of the things which is interesting is when you're done with the conversation and you end the conversation, you have an option to download basically the audio of the discussion. And I downloaded one of those and listened back to it and was like, this thing's really not there yet. I was asking it some pretty basic stuff and the responses were unimpressive. So the concept's really cool. The fact that they're getting this out of a 7 billion parameter model is impressive. Debatably, this is important because of the fact that it could be considered important from an industry's perspective in terms of the way open source is already really pushing the limits of what's possible, especially given what we've already discussed about how important voice is going to be. But Moshi itself and this news out of QTI, I would consider optional at this point.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go onto their website. I don't know if anyone else did, to see like what benchmarks are they saying that they're beating for.
No, they aren't, and so I think it's optional too. It could be really important, but it's a product announcement basically, and they don't cite any particular benchmarks to sustain their claim of equivalence to GPT-4o. So could be really killer if it is true. But Adam's experience belies that, and I haven't tried it, but there's no evidence yet.
It's similar to GPT-4o in that you're getting sub 300 millisecond response times from a conversational agent.
So fast response.
But the inference and the reasoning and the sensibility coming out of it are...
Speed doesn't matter if you're quickly getting nonsense, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll go.
We can call it the presidential candidate bot.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Quickly,
exactly. The political candidate.
Put it up on the next debate, and it'll be even more painful to watch.
And it was so quick to respond to me. I mean, it's cool that it has dual voice channels, so it can interrupt you and you can interrupt it, and it can do both. But it was sort of jumping the gun and assuming what I was going to ask and answering me before I'd even finished my question, and then it wasn't even answering what I was asking. And I tried to say, "Can you please stop interrupting me?" And it just wouldn't get it.
All right.
Wow, there's so many wonderful places we can go from there.
Yeah.
That sounds just like my blah blah blah, right?
Optional for me as well, but I want to note that there is a power base that's being created in France. Look at that. It's another group that is doing a great job, very competitive in this space, so in the core space. So this is good.
Yeah, Hugging Face and Mistral. And now this.
There's three players in France. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I think this notion of sovereign AI is going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, policy matters, support matters.
All right, we will mark this as optional, but keep an eye on it. We're going to talk more about small models in another article, so perhaps we can call attention to that movement, which we've been talking about it for a while when we get to that one. All right, Ankaj.
Okay, so the next one comes from IEEE, and it discusses how good is ChatGPT at coding and discusses some limitations in training when you train it on data before 2021 or ask it something on related to data after 2021.
All right, we've seen a lot of tests on coding, but this one seemed quite extensive. With several languages, over 700 different problems. What do you think, Tim?
I think this is old news and really poor analysis, but other than that, it's terrific. So optional, heavily optional for me. First of all, they tested ChatGPT 3.5. At the rate this marketplace is moving, who cares what ChatGPT 3.5 does for coding? Second of all, really unclear how you do this. I am totally skeptical of these kinds of analyses because coding is writing. Writing is thinking. And so you're really benchmarking thinking. So, and also, where do they get the problem sets from? The problem sets come from the same places the training is done. They didn't say how they eliminate the training other than they have this natural experiment because ChatGPT 3.5 ended its training in 2021. Surprise, surprise, it doesn't do well on problem sets after 2021. But it didn't do that well on problem sets before 2021, whereas ChatGPT 4 does pretty well on those. So I think you have to try the modern systems because there were enormous improvements in that generation. And so I just think it's a waste of time.
All right, a scathing review from Mr. Andrews. Yeah, I was a little perplexed why they tested 3.5 as well. I guess the one thing I thought about, though, is we keep hearing about whether there are emergent capabilities that help these LLMs reason across new problems. And I think we're increasingly seeing the answer is no, but this is an older model. Right?
It's unclear, but again, also this is the wrong issue. ChatGPT 4.0 Turbo, the best one, or Claude Opus are not great writers. They're okay writers, and you know what? That's good enough for an enormous amount of things, but they're not great writers. And I think we're going to find the same thing in coding. They'll probably be fine for lots and lots of stuff. They're probably not going to be fantastic because it's a very similar process.
Yeah, the article itself is certainly optional, but there's a lot to be said about the coding in general done by the bots. It can be done provided you give them the design of what you want to do. So I've tried many times, and it can't come up with it by itself if it hasn't seen it someplace. So it's usually you need to design the solution really. And then it can do a great job in producing code. So it's a wonderful performance enhancer, but it can't really think as well as human, not yet, for sure.
All right, we will go optional on this one. We have next, Akash.
Okay, the next one comes from the founders of Quora. It's a chatbot called POE, and you can use different LLMs through a single chat interface through POE. And they have released a new functionality called reviews.
Yeah, so this functionality is somewhat similar to what we saw Anthropic do with artifacts, and POE, of course, gives you access to multiple models, including I think Anthropic's model as well, it says on there. What do we think about this one, Luda?
Yeah, I think it's a release, a product announcement from Quora, but nothing really new. I think the name is very confusing, and even I logged in on Quora and tried to download it. I haven't played with it yet. It's a good functionality. It goes across the model, so you can pick your own model and ask questions, and it does apparently good reviews. I haven't played with it, but I think it's optional for our audience. So it's very similar to what other platforms like Anthropic would do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was going to try to make a case for important. I was listening to an interview with Adam D'Angelo, the CEO founder of Quora, and posed, strategy of like sitting on top of all the models and combining what they have in Quora with human intelligence and machine intelligence. That symbiosis, I think, is kind of interesting, and I haven't played with it either. But if the tech, I think this notion of having a integration layer that allows you to do multiple experts by calling on different models seems to me pretty powerful. And some of the illustrations seem pretty impressive. So remember, important still not required reading. It's just make time for it. I would give this an important.
Yeah, but who is this aimed at the moment? Like, who's going to use this, right? Like computer geeks, the average consumer.
No, I would.
One model, like, are they going to sit here and say, oh, I'm going to take this one because I can choose different models and I'm going to choose this one and that one? Like, right, some of these, I just feel like there's no audience for this.
Content creators, I think, would use this. And there's a ton of content creators. Certainly back at PwC, if I was there, we would be experimenting with this. As well to create content, and certainly, I think we should be using it. As a company, we should be experimenting with it. You might say we're computer geeks, back in your label, but I think law firms, all those folks should be hacking around with this.
I'll go with John here. It's a product announcement. The announcement itself is similar to Anthropic, so there's nothing exciting. But I think, to your question, David, if you had said to people when VisiCalc came out, is this important? You would have thought, this is for a bunch of geeks, because people hadn't been exposed to it that much, and it takes some cultural training. Literally, it takes some understanding and some demand expectation that you'll just learn this, and nobody would be. It's John's argument about the power tools, right? Nobody would be thought of as reasonable if they didn't know how to use a spreadsheet. But actually using a spreadsheet is quite a complex skill. And everybody does it, not just programmers and geeks. So I think this is similar in the sense that what makes the spreadsheet really valuable is it's always live. It's always showing you exactly what's going on at that moment. It recalculates in real time, and you can see the changes instantaneously, and the interface is pretty simple for the complexity that you can conquer. And I think these live kind of things are going that direction, and they're a huge impact on your ability to understand what's going on with a computer. The ability, even in this simple example, to just analyze a financial statement and generate a presentation in real time and tweak that presentation in real time. I grew up believing in this stuff, so I'm a Kool-Aid drinker. This is what Park and the others wanted all along, was a live system all the time. Alan's favorite saying was authoring. The great thing about paper is authoring is always on. Anybody can write on it and change it, and you see the effects immediately. Whereas in computers, most of the time, the users are locked out. Everything is fixed and you can't do anything. So these things that sort of open the hood and let you tweak in real time like a spreadsheet, I think are going to be the new paradigm. And so this particular announcement today is not going to change the world, but this style of interface, I think, actually could.
Yeah, and for those of you following along, the Alan that Tim is talking about is Alan Kay.
Alan Kay, sorry. Yes.
Inventor of object-oriented programming, first employee at Xerox PARC, and that Alan.
Yeah, and he invented the GUI interface, more importantly, and the idea that he's always said the spreadsheet was the best interface ever invented. He thought it was better than the GUI.
Yeah, and just for the record too, he made a bunch of money on a company that I was on the board of, and you got to love what Alan did with the money he made on Diamond Technology stock. What he did was he built a 15th century pipe organ and a whole building to contain it, and a library in his house in Glendale, California, and he can play a full-on pipe organ with the pedals and 4 keyboards and stuff. Genius guy, lovely man.
Yeah, 20,000 book library.
All right.
He read them all.
Against these two, or are we going with important and moving on?
Yeah, Also, I think to Tim and John, they're talking about future, how this can change the interface really. But it's also a trend, right? This is the second one we're seeing. I think there will be more.
Yeah, it's not new at this point, but we will go with important.
Can I just bookmark the fact we said no news here? I could take this thing, I can throw it in an interim report and creates a website. Come on, whatever.
But we just it's now that it's done, right? Like it's not novel at this point. So we saw one of these already on a model that people actually use. Who's using POE? I don't know, but we'll go with important.
Okay, the next one that we have comes from Applied Materials. So they have revealed new chip wiring innovations that result in energy efficient computing.
All right, it's a slow news day if we're talking about chip wiring, but here we are. What do we got? Oh, but this was assigned to Paul, who wasn't able to show up. John, I'm giving it to you.
All right, yes, I was going to say optional for our AI leader, but man, how mind blowing! You're down at 2 nanometers doing this stuff. You're talking about 60 miles of wire and, and the chips, and they're trying to get to 1 trillion chips. I mean, 1 trillion, you know, transistors on a chip. It's simply amazing. You know, the ability for them to innovate on both the materials, because copper's, you know, as you get down to they're talking 2 nanometers and beyond. I mean, it's just mind blowing to think about this stuff. And you know, the ability for it to decrease power consumption, I think it was by about 30%, and you know, improve performance. So it's really important area. And you know, they're inventing new materials and inventing new geometry. Uh, but I think you know, it reads more like a product announcement. Doesn't you know, there's no kind of outside review on it. It is the hardware layer, and I don't know if you folks were able. I couldn't figure out how much was actually been deployed, you know, as opposed to, you know, in prototype. So I'm going to give it an optional,
Right.
but it is absolutely my. I mean, if you sit back and look at it, it blows my mind anyway. I mean, yeah, I know, you know, DNA and stuff, and then we can get down lower and better power consumption. But for a human-made artifact, this is it bends the mind.
It is. It's amazing, but I agree it's optional, and I didn't find any. They said all the major chip makers are adopting it, which pretty much they always do, because AMAT, Applied Materials, is basically the supplier for this stuff. Again, these industries are extremely consolidated, so there aren't many players doing this stuff. It is amazing, and it does seem like a real improvement if these numbers pan out, both in energy reduction and in yield, because the other thing is,
Yes.
when you put the wires close together, you get crosstalk and all sorts of other problems. So, so this seems like it could be great, but it is early. It's not really in the day-to-day life of an AI software leader. I will say one thing, it is amazing, and they talked about, what was it, 60 miles of wire? Your nerves in a single human being are 25,000 miles. So that gives you a sense of scale.
Yeah. And so now we're talking about, so that means that, you know, one of the NVIDIA, you know, servers probably has at least that, right? At least to 25,000 miles, I would think.
I don't know, probably, but we're approaching it. Yes, that's the point. The point is that these things are still tiny in comparison individually, but yeah, if you add up 1,000 of these chips, 2,000 of these chips, 10,000 of these chips, you start to approach human levels of connectivity.
One thing I was surprised by, the article didn't say anything about the software used to create the stuff, and you know, all of the you know, design software that they use to create these has both traditional AI and started to have more and more generative AI built into it, as you know, Jensen, CEO of you know, NVIDIA, talked about. So, but that's been going on for years, right? The design software. So I thought it was interesting that they didn't mention any of that, but whatever, optional.
All right, optional it is. Move us on.
Interesting reading for the geeks.
Okay, the next one comes from WSJ, and it talks about how AI is threatening tech companies' climate commitments. So there was a recent news about Google blowing up its climate targets. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Google releasing their sustainability report during the week of 4th of July when no one's paying attention because it was not good news. I know this strategy well. Um, what do we think about this one? John, you were on this one as well.
Yes, yeah. Um, I thought it's optional news. I think it's interesting. The Goldman Sachs has a lovely report that talks about how the the climate stuff is going to power availability is going to be a challenge for data centers and so forth. And utilities are moving slowly, and then the climate impact is starting to hit more because back when you were switching from internal data centers, which put out a lot of carbon, to cloud data centers and so forth, the trade-off was pretty good because Google, in terms of, carbon per MIP was a lot better than, Chase Bank by itself, right? But now we're hitting the limit of that. That conversion's happened, and now seeing increase in primary demand. And the numbers I hear thrown around, and I can believe them, are the human brain is 10,000 times as energy efficient if you take a synapse and a brain function and put it onto a logic function, which is a funky mapping. But let's say we go with that for a minute to use the analogy. As we add more and more intelligence, as we can see, we need lots more processing, and the demand for processing is going up faster than the ability to decrease power consumption. Power creation is not on a very good performance curve until you get into real solar and better batteries. It's much more of an industrial technology. It's not a. It's more. It's less of a fast moving technology in terms of performance. So I imagine that this is going to increase carbon for a while until we get better designs and better power. So not surprising, disappointing. These big companies to keep their commitments are going to have to do bold new things. I think that's why Gates is so interested in his new, small use nuclear power. But getting it, there hasn't been a nuclear power plant built in this country in less than 10 years in forever. So like that, optional but important. I'm sorry, optional,
But important.
important trend, optional reading. How about that?
Important as a citizen, optional to the AI leader. Yeah, and I would agree.
Well, it may not be optional for much longer if the AI leaders' expenses go up because power is in short supply, etc. I mean, that already is happening, right?
But it's a forcing function, David. It's a forcing function to start really focusing on power and efficiency, right? So it will solve itself, but it's a great forcing function, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to solve itself through building new infrastructure. That's going to take forever.
No. Right, exactly.
We can really keep up with power demand today. I think I read the same piece as you, John, talking about there hasn't been a surge in electricity demand
Right.
in a very long time. We're completely unprepared for it.
Right.
The Goldman report we talked about yesterday also went into this issue, and energy is going to become a gating factor if we don't catch up with the small models. But we all are seeing progress on that, and we're about to talk about that in our next article.
I think it's too early to make judgments.
I like the old joke that says, Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison fell asleep, and they woke up, fell asleep 100 years ago, and they woke up, and Alexander Graham Bell looks around and says, "Wow, the phone has changed so much." And Thomas Edison looks around and says, "Well, the power grid's pretty much the way I left it."
That's right. All right, we'll go optional on the article, important on the trend. I think we have one more today, Ankash. Ankash, you still there?
Yeah. Sorry, David. I was on mute. Yes. So the last one that we have for today talks about the smaller large language models.
All right. Yes, we've been biting around the edges of this conversation here. Tim, tell us about this article and what you think.
Well, I think it's, again, it's I think it's optional. I mean, you could argue just for the survey value, it might be important for the AI leader, but I don't think so. I don't think there's anything in here of real utility. I don't think it's at all settled. I think people are drawing, they love to draw conclusions because that makes it more controversial. And oh gosh, it's the end of OpenAI because small models are going to overtake the world and fine tuning's going to win. But actually, there's just not nearly enough experience at scale to understand what works better. There's a logical argument that if you use precise data and smaller models, you get a big win. But there's no actual evidence of that in the real world at scale yet. And the ability of large language models to do a variety of tasks pretty well is incredibly valuable. And small models have not proved they can do that yet. Maybe combining small models, we've talked about that before, but all these are brand new and nobody's at any significant level of scale. So I think they're just trying to make something exciting when we just don't know, and we're not going to know for a while.
Yeah, I think really interesting to speak to someone at Experian, though. They use the example of Experian using smaller models for financial advice and their customer service, which is obviously pretty important. So I'd be curious to see how they're going about doing that.
It's interesting. We were having dinner last night with a very senior person at one of the frontier model companies, and he pointed out that none of the mega models, 400 billion parameters, 500 billion parameters and above, none of the companies have created effective models that converge who don't have alumni from a combination of Google and DeepMind. And if you look at the family tree, there's just not a company that doesn't have somebody from those teams that cracked the code at the beginning. Which is, I thought, an interesting observation.
It's where it all came from. It's where the Transformer paper came from. It's, Google, invented most everything on the web right now, especially around big data and AI.
Yeah. And in fact, Tim, to your point, I think we reviewed an article that had some data about smaller models versus bigger models. Smaller models are being trained on vertical industry application. And they showed that sometimes the smaller models, when asked specific questions in that application, were fine. But the minute they stand out of that application, they couldn't quite cope. Where the large
right. But there's also, remember, going way back, there was a comparison of, I think, ChatGPT-4 to MedPalm, which is a Google-trained model specifically for medicine, and ChatGPT-4 outperformed it with no tuning at all.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's enough experience in the field. This is the difference between theory and practice. In theory, makes a ton of sense. Small models, energy efficient, finely tuned, great data, perfect idea. Maybe put a few of them together and you get the mixture of experts thing, but the practice is unclear as to what works better.
No. It's probably a combination.
All right, good discussion. We're going optional, and Ankaj will pull up our final results, but I can say we went one important out of all the articles today. So Light Day, that was the POE article, which we're again flagging the nice user interfaces that are starting to emerge to help us be able to see what we're working on as we're working with these models. Everything else is optional. So Light Reading Day, that means if you didn't read the Goldman report and some of the longer things we proposed that you looked at yesterday, you have some time to catch up. And we will call it a day today. Please, as always, visit us on YouTube. We've got some other videos up there from Dr. John talking about various topics that we think you'll find interesting. We also have all our old learning labs up there and all of these briefings, and do sign up for our newsletter.
Yeah, you missed the learning lab last night. It was a good one, so definitely check it out.
All right. So I'm not sure if it's posted yet, but if it isn't, it will be soon. All right. GAIinsights.com is where you can find
5 minutes with Dr. John as well as Paul's segment have been posted to the YouTube.
All right, fantastic.
Adam.
See everybody tomorrow. Have a good one.